Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the AIA Austin Homes Tour. Today, I am joined by Jill Wilkinson, who was my client for this project. And I first wanted to thank the sponsors, Daglish Construction, as well as, yes, thank you very much for sponsoring the tour, and Eastside Lumber and Decking. I wanted to start by saying this is the third project that I have the honor of working on for my client. And all of them happen to be located in basically one city block in the heritage neighborhood. So I thought what we would do today is I've prepared a little video that talks about the design ambition of the project. And we will start by showing it to you, and then we can continue the discussion, and I'll open the question and answer. The question and answer, you can go to the Q&A and put in a question, and we will respond to it at the end of the video. So without any further ado, Oren, if you could cue the video, please. I wanted to start talking about the project by looking at the site context. The site of the triplets is located in the heritage neighborhood, which is a sub-district of the West University neighborhood plan, close to the University of Texas at Austin, which is undergoing a very rapid growth. It looks more like Manhattan than Austin. And so as a result of that, it has put a lot of pressure on the heritage neighborhood to densify and to accommodate more and more housing. So on this particular project, the client was interested in using the existing stock, the existing buildings, mostly made up of a bungalow typology, and accommodate the needs of maybe a student population or a young couple so that they could come and invest in this neighborhood and continue to feed the neighboring school system, which are very dependent on this neighborhood being used by family rather than only students. So to orient you, north is this way, West Campus is where I'm sitting, and we have the University of Texas a little bit to my right. Along the edge of the heritage neighborhood, which is defined by 29, 38, Guadalupe, and Lamar, we have mostly kind of a commercial zone. And the moment you go into the neighborhood, it transitions into more like, traditional, detached, single-family bungalows. Another project that I worked on for the same client 4 years ago, which involved the design of a garden and a new residence. And directly across the street, we were presented with this house, which was built in 1927, that was a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom. And the oddity about that house is that it featured very tall ceilings, about 11'6". And so it led the client to ask me to see if there is a way to capitalize on this odd feature. The client bought 2 sites, which feature 3 buildings. We renovated this one. This is a project I'm going to talk about today, and this was kind of another one. So it's called the Triplets, bounded by Rio Grande, which runs north-south, and 29.5. 29th Street, and then this is kind of a little bit of an alleyway. and all around we have housing stock with a more commercial outfit bordering 29th Street. So I'm going to show you the evolution of the plan. So this is the final site plan, which has not really evolved from the original site plan. It shows what we call the triplet. So this is a Dogtrot project, the Cabanon, and this one is on 2905 Rio Grande. The original plan was as such, and it was a 3-bedroom and 1 bathroom, and then a living room, dining room, kitchen. It featured a porch. You go up a couple of steps, and this is an open porch raised about 4 feet from the level of the street. When Jill approached me, she was very frank. She told me, listen, I already have a plan for how to renovate this into a very traditional bungalow. Is there a way to come up with a scheme that would really capitalize on the unusual ceiling height? So what we started to do is surmise that originally this was probably a Dogtrot. By Dogtrot, I'm referring to two 15-foot bays separated by a breezeway that runs all the way across it, thereby separating two cabins. So this was a unit. This was another unit which was smaller by virtue of the fact that it had kind of an exterior veranda leading to it. So the first attempt was to really kind of peel away from the different campaign of construction that had happened on this project since the 1920s. And the moment we started to think of this as a Dogtrot typology, it then led us to think of, if we establish kind of a long axis as a circulation strategy, we could then introduce the cross axis, and it became all about a proportioning system, like a composition and proportion. And the way this was set up was to the minor axis, which goes north-south to counteract the east-west major axis, was done so that it cut the building into two equal parts. So that the rationale was, okay, by doing this, we create 4 cabins or 4 boxes. Each have their own uses. So we have 4 different zones, 2 for sleeping, 1 for cooking, 1 for living. And then in those interstitial bands, they are wide enough so that they don't just accommodate circulation, but this zone, for example, would accommodate dining, whereas the zone further to the south would accommodate maybe a small office. And the main axis could also incorporate some chairs or a low table. So there was really an interest in using the Dogtrot typology to kind of set up a very strong, legible floor plan. Served spaces, like major spaces, the 4 cabins, and then a very generous circulation area. Now, when we arrive at this division of space, we really try to think about how can we make that even more legible. And it led to the idea of recessing the end of the trot. So where we had windows, we would kind of recess it back just so that it further articulates those 4 cabins. I should mention that when we started working on the project, the client did not ask us to redo the foundation or the roof. So those were accepted as a given, and our only site of operation was the space between the roof and the plinth. By recessing those windows, we could also provide some self-shading so that the light, we would benefit from a lot of natural light, but because those windows are recessed from the face of the building, they would be self-shaded, so that it would not lead to too much of a heat gain. So here I'm showing you kind of the finished floor plan, where you go up into the porch, you enter, and then you have a private zone comprised of the two ensuite bedrooms, each getting its own bathroom, very generous storage area. And then on the other side, we have the more public spaces featuring a living room, a dining space, a kitchen, and then back of house with a pantry and a washer dryer. By virtue of creating those axes, we were also interested in bringing about a different type of garden, different types of trees as you look south, east, north, or west, just to maybe track the four seasons or the four cardinal orientation. Project about preservation, even though it's very respectful of the traditional house. We did not add anything to the house. If anything, we took it away. I was very interested in providing an intervention into an existing building. An intervention which I would classify as being dignified in the sense that it's very strong, very legible. And some of the ideas we talked about with a client who's very interested in art and art history, was kind of taking an idea of Mata Clark, the artist, who would kind of create an opening into an old building, which is kind of what those trots look like. Those trots are full heights, whereas the rest of the building fabric, we are preserving the original, more or less, the original positioning of the traditional windows. There was a desire to read like a Palladian plan, where it's very guided by composition and geometry as much as possible. The interesting aspect of that is that if you look at our Dogtrot floor plan, and then if you look at the site, there is an idea, there is a suggestion of a division of 4 areas on the site plan, which we have actually mimicked on the Dogtrot. This section kind of shows the concept. The roof doesn't change, the plinth is there. As you can see, the site is dropping quite significantly. And you are starting to read those cabins, and you notice how the trot element, the breezeways, are expressed by a full window height from floor to ceiling. So then that leads us to some exterior design consideration. This is a view of the main entrance. And from the outside, you notice that the intervention is full height, but the existing building, we kept the windows exactly the way they are. This leads us to a side elevation where you can see, how the full height window really separates the rest of the massing of the building. The compositional obsession also happened on the outside, where we made it so that the full height window could be subdivided so that it kind of lines up with the existing windows. And also so that the center part of that window is openable, again, to encourage natural ventilation. All of those windows are openable. So the moment we latched on to this concept of the 4 cabins between the base and the roof, we then really thought about how can we reinforce this idea even further? How do we make it even more legible? And that was done by manipulating the ceiling in such a way that if this was a porch and this was one of the trots, when you are on the trots, you have full height, but the moment you step into the cabin, the ceiling is lowered. And again, that was a compositional design method to give the illusion that the 4 cabins were slotted into the site and therefore would have kind of a smaller ceiling. This was kind of a quick axon of one of the cabins. So I wanted to quickly show you a concept model which was done early in the process. So we have the roof, we have the base, and we have the 4 cabins. And the reason I am showing you that is that this was done very early in the process, but it became our generating idea. It became kind of our inspiration, so that as we moved forward into the detailing, we always knew that we had to refer to this concept of the 4 cabins. To me, it's helpful, even if it's very rough, even if it's very preliminary, to come up with a concept, with an ideas model, which can be very abstract, but at the same time enumerates like a very strong principle about, this is what is going to happen. One of the challenges on this project was to hold on to just one idea. Sometimes as an architect, you get very tempted to kind of introduce a lot of ideas, and then it can easily become an overdose, and you lose the plot. So let me quickly show a more final model where you can see how even in its final execution, the main compositional elevation is preserved. These ideas of the trot, this cross, which goes all the way through the building, that this has stayed. I'm going to remove the roof. And some of the features that I can now point to in this model are very close to what the actual construction looked like. And they dealt again about a refinement of the scheme. And by that I mean each one of those cabins is clad with kind of a wood siding, painted the same color. Again, in an attempt to make those 4 cabins as kind of autonomous objects. And then at every corner, we introduced a white trim, like a vertical white trim to really mark the edges of the box. And then we went ahead and added a horizontal trim on the floor and on the ceiling so that the box becomes very legible. All of the windows, the full height windows, which are inside of the trot, they were painted black because we felt it was less conspicuous and it would kind of blend in more with the landscape, so that when you look through a black frame, you are less aware of the frame than if you look through a white painted frame. Inside the cabin, this threshold between the more public space and entering the room, this was treated again. We wanted to create an opening that had to be the right proportion. We didn't want it to be too tall. It would make it seem as if you are going through a plane, but we wanted to bring the header down so that you feel like you are entering into a volume. After we set up this, this strategy, then we also decided to treat the windows inside of the cabin in a more traditional way than the Dogtrot windows. The Dogtrot windows are wood-clad windows, where it's kind of an aluminum exterior and a wood on the inside. Whereas those double-hung windows all the way around the perimeter of the buildings are all a sash window, traditional wood sash windows. And again, that was again a desire to talk about a more traditional treatment, which would feature traditional trim around the opening, both on the inside and the outside, and a more contemporary treatment on the full height ceiling. And to me, this is a way to be sympathetic with the context of the heritage neighborhood, which is made up mostly of buildings like this. But the moment you step inside, you realize that, oh, there is an element of surprise. The way the light comes in, it's much more luminous than you would expect on purpose. And so we were really interested in having the traditional and the modern kind of be together without privileging one over the other. And this part of the model shows kind of the manipulation of the ceiling and how each of the 4 cabins more or less have a lower ceiling, which is painted white, whereas the ceiling of the crossing, just much like the floor of the crossing, it's actually teak engineered wood both on the floor and on the ceiling, as a way to differentiate the circulation from the destination. Okay, so this was an early model done immediately after we settled on the 4-cabin concept. We wanted to do a jump in scale. This is at ½ inch to a foot, and what interested us there was to basically test the 4-cabin concept. You can see in this iteration, this cabin housed the kitchen. It was more of a galley kitchen, and this space was for the living room, but we still had the 2-bedroom and ensuite bathroom, the main trot circulation path, and a cross axis with a dining room creating a little bit of a path through between the living room, dining room, and also the kitchen, just to create this very strong axis. And so here you could also see the desire to treat the windows, which are on the historic facade, separately than the full height windows. The reason we are building at that scale is that I believe architecture is a very tactile field, and to me, the bigger the model, the closer you approximate the reality. You can have a better understanding of light, and I'm sorry the model is so dirty, but you can see the light hitting the surface. You can put your head and kind of understand the space, the more physical space, in a way that a rendering or a walkthrough, even though those can be very helpful early in the process, but they can be very deceiving as well. I think when you do a model, it kind of helps ground you as an architect. It's a very helpful design tool for both me as the architect, and I really believe that for a client, it kind of helps them understand the flow of space, and especially when you are manipulating ceiling heights, it's kind of more of a sensorial reaction than if you look at a floor plan or a section. So these are views from the exterior showing the wood siding, this kind of dark gray wood siding, and how around the original windows we have kind of a very thick white trim, as well as around the box. We have our white picket fence in the front. This is another view showing the relationship to the street, Rio Grande. And this is as we are walking up to the porch. Here we decided to use more like a metal balustrade and a metal stair, as if it was kind of clamped into the traditional fabric of the house. So there was a desire to make this feature read as something that was bolted on and added later on. And this is kind of a view of the porch and the kind of nice light quality you have when the sun sets in the evening. Then we're going to move into the interior, where you notice there is a continuity of the material on the outside of this glazing element, and how it goes all the way inside, and how the cabin is defined by the white trim, both on the ceiling and the edge on the floor. And the proportion of that opening is such that you really convey that you are entering into a box rather than going through a plane. The floor and the ceiling of the trot areas is in teak wood, whereas the moment you go inside of this is looking at the living room space, everything is painted white. This is looking back from the living room into the kitchen. The strategy for the kitchen was to have 3 hutches, 3 kind of elements, one containing the fridge, which was panel ready, so that it was concealed, so that when you sit on the sofa you don't see the fridge. And then we have the oven and then the sink on that side. And here this is more like a Japanese ceremonial tea house experience, but this would be like the dining space, which is open both to the kitchen and also to the living room with that full height window on the side. This is more of an oblique view showing again the legibility of those cabins and how the consistency of colors. Even inside some of those hutches, it's all monolithically painted. Even where we have a back painted glass here, acting as a backsplash, we wanted to paint the back of it a light gray so that it feels like one block which has been carved. This is a detail of one of the hutch incorporating the sink and some shelving area. And here we are seeing both the study area as well as kind of the living room, and the floor to ceiling being this teak wood. This is again another detail, zooming in on the corner of the living room, looking out through the floor to ceiling trot window as well as a more traditional window. You can make out some of the detailing here. And this is more like a dusk view of the living room, showing a possible furnishings. You know, one of the interest in designing the house is to really think of it as a container that is abstract enough so that it can be filled by the owner in any way they would like. This is more of kind of a minimalist treatment on the interior, featuring some beautiful Nakashima furniture, but it can also be something more vibrant, or there can be more artwork on the wall. So it was really a desire to create a shell that can be handled in a different way. This is a detail of a threshold from the office area into the bedroom. And here the strategy is to have kind of a bit of a compression. As you go into the bedroom, you go into this lower ceiling, and this window that you see there is a clerestory window from the bathroom, so that you borrow some of the light that you get from the trot, and then it would make its way, you know, indirectly into the bathroom, so that it's not too dark in there. And here we decided to use the color white, treat it as a very generous trim element, rather than introduce another wood veneer element, which would be different in tone from what we already had. We thought we would just paint it white so that it acts as a frame leading into the bedroom. This is a view of one of the bedrooms, again, very, very restrained, very Zen-like. And this is again looking down one of the corridor leading from one of the trot space into one of the bedrooms. Those are some snippets, some details of, you know, zooming in on the material, the siding, the baseboard, and the flooring. And this one also kind of starts to look at the trim, the more traditional trim around the window, the more traditional window. This is a little bit of a pan of a Dogtrot. And so here, those images, we are going to look at views across the trot. And so here, this view was looking towards the cabanon, which is behind the house. And you can see how there is actually some concealed doors. You can barely make up the profile there. And even the return air was incorporated into the siding, so that it doesn't look like a white, you know, metal frame, but it's actually built out of wood. And I should mention that that was also one of the that's one of the reasons why we kept the ceiling of the cabin lower than the ceiling of the trot, is that we could then position the supply on the vertical surface rather than have it on the ceiling. This is a detail looking back toward the entrance, and this is a view of the dining room with the kitchen and living room flanking it, and the floor-to-ceiling window with that center rectangular element, which is actually openable and can be screened to prevent mosquitoes. Those are a couple of views of the office area with its built-in bookshelves. And this is a detail of looking out with the beginning of a tree and how that might help provide some privacy, as well as add some texture and try to bring the landscape in. And this view from the front clearly shows how you can see all the way through the building, both on the major axis and the minor axis. And it also kind of gives a bit more detail about the construction of the metal stair and balustrade. I should mention, originally the house was designed with the desire to have the stem wall being metal, being either perforated metal or a McNichols mesh, because we were interested in having the 4 cabins rest on a metal cage and then having a ceiling on top of that. Eventually, it was decided in discussion with the owner that we would want to stick to stucco. And those are, again, a couple of final shots, showing the character of the exterior of the house. And a little detail showing the stem wall and the traditional trim. And some final kind of a nighttime shot.
Okay, I hope you've enjoyed this kind of very detailed introduction, explanation of the project. I'm seeing a couple of questions which I'm going to start to answer, and then that might stimulate a further discussion with me or with Jill. David Cooper is saying it's great to see beautiful monochromatic models used for design again, a design tool lost on so many young architects these days. I very much agree with that, and as I also teach at the School of Architecture, and I always make it a purpose, and some of my students who are watching know that painfully clear, that there is no substitute to a physical model to kind of understand space and ideas of materiality. And recently we bought a 3D print machine, an Ultimaker, which is what we have used to kind of generate those kind of models, which are very abstract by virtue of being the same color, but I still find it very helpful to, to understand the concept and to represent it. Weber Studio asked, was the kitchen layout client-driven? Interesting layout, which seems to indicate that the kitchen would not be used much for frequent use. So the idea between the 3 hutches, which are incorporated into the wall, is that it would liberate some of the space in the center which can then be used as an extension to the dining room, so that a dining space can maybe go over part of the kitchen as well as kind of the dining area. It's a very compact house. It's overall 1,400 square feet. The climatized space is about 1,200 square feet. And the idea was to use that center open space. It could be, one could add a trolley or a kind of a butcher block that can be kind of wheeled around. So it was a desire to leave as much of an open space as we could and make the room have kind of different kinds of uses. Was that your understanding, Jill?
Yes, I thought that it would leave people free to put in an island of sorts, probably, like you said, not a permanent island.
Okay, Sophia Fleshman asks, do the 4 cabins have separate HVAC? How did you connect the systems while breaking up the roof? Yes, that's a good question. And I think I misspoke in the video in that the ceiling, the supply ducts are on the ceiling of the 4 cabins, which is all painted white. I didn't want any ducts on the ceiling of the trot, which I treated as kind of a 5th facade, as a very important continuation of the wood ceiling. So the supply happens inside the 4 cabins, and then it is being led through the return, which is integrated in one of the trot walls. If you go to the Matterport, you can kind of zoom in and notice how the slats of the return are designed so as to be as inconspicuous as possible. Hugh Randolph asks, nicely done, but in your opinion, is a building still a Dogtrot if the in-between spaces are closed in and not open air? And what does a homeowner use the interior Dogtrot area for? So to clarify, the Dogtrot is used as kind of a typological mechanism to kind of build a 21st century house. There is an option to open the window or putting screen or open the doors so as to create kind of an airflow. But we also wanted to use those trot areas not only as breezeway, but as functional space. So in some of the image I showed later, you can see one of them can be used as a dining table. And on the southern side, the concept was that it could become a small office. Each trot is about 6 foot, 6'6". So it's, it's bigger than, it's bigger than you would need for circulation. And again, the idea was that the client could bring about their own use or transform it in any way they would like. I should mention that both this project, the Dogtrot and the cabanon behind, and the Court and Courten house, those were designed as spec houses. Jill was a client, and we very much handled it with a lot of attention to craftsmanship. We really wanted to, show some buildings where the way you put it together is very considered and measured. And so even though we had, Jill provided input as a potential client, she did not become the ultimate client, even though you could have if you wanted to. Yeah, that's right. Okay, then I have a question from Cameron Osborne. Charles, have you had the pleasure of living in the house? No, I have not, Cameron. It is amazing when you are an architect and you see the construction happening to be able to go in and out at your leisure, both during the CA process, but also to basically spend a little bit more time and understand how, a concept that our office came up with, how it's becoming built and understanding the proportion. So I very much spent a lot of time inside the house, not as an occupier. Jessica Deaver beautiful presentation. Who was your filmmaker? So, you know, when AIA Austin announced that they were going to do a virtual homes tour, I thought it was a very courageous stance by AIA. Even though as an architect, you love to show your house and be able to touch it and experience it. I thought that this new concept provided an opportunity for us as architects to really try to reach out to you, to potential client, to other architects. So I've invested a lot of resources in trying to produce a movie. I used two filmmakers. The first one for most of the exterior shots was Ocotillo Films, who did a very good job. And then for the play-by-play, as it were, where I kind of explained the process, I've done that with Ibai Rigby, who's also an architect and who also did the photography of the images which are on my website, whereas Tobin Davis did the photography of what's on the portal right now. Tim Cuppet, thank you both for working to maintain the scale and respecting the neighborhood. Thank you, Tim. As you know, Jill, I don't know if you want to add anything to it, but that's definitely one of your passion too.
Yes, I'd like to say that was our ambition, was to try to save these houses, but also make them interesting and more modern. And so that was what we were up to. And I think it's working a little bit. We can't seem to, we'd love to get our hands on more of them, but it's hard. So, but anyway, that is true. We were trying to keep the neighborhood, maintain some of the neighborhood's feeling, but yet modernize things so that the houses were more livable and beautiful.
Yeah, I do want to stress that the joy of working with a client like Jill is that there's not necessarily an interest in maximizing the footprint of the house, but sure, more of maintaining the bulk and massing so that it really fits into the neighborhood. But at the same time, bringing the design, you know, maybe in a more contemporary way. And it's been wonderful to both be able to design a new build across the street, Corten, where it's kind of more maybe edgy, even though it was designed to kind of blend in the neighborhood, as well as doing a remodel, a small 1,200 square foot remodel. And I think we live now in an age where we, you know, we are all remodeling inside, like we all have to kind of rethink, you know, how our immediate surrounding could be reshaped and transformed. And so I hope this is an example of what that might look like. Christy Seals asks, are the gray bands on the floor painted floorboards, wood, or another material? They are wood transition piece, and they are there. They're a little bit conspicuous, but they are there because early in the design process, again, in an attempt to make the design even more legible, there was this idea that every time you step from the trot to the cabin, the floor of the cabin would be painted white. So it's kind of like a little coconut experience, like you would go into a fully white space. Eventually, we decided to leave, you know, to carry the teak flooring all the way through. And so we were left with this wood band, which acts as kind of a transition piece. That's a good question. Brian Cates loves the rigor of the design. Did you consider running the dark threshold across the floor under the two facing built-in cabinets toe kick space? Let me see if I can understand that question. Did I consider running the dark threshold across the floor under the two facing built-in cabinets to kick spaces? No, I think if I understand the question, I wanted to leave the threshold, the dark threshold, only where you had an opening. I didn't want it to kind of continue where we had the built-in furniture. I hope I've answered your question. Murray Legg, nice project. Can you talk about your broader approach to the idea of historic preservation. What I like about this house is the tension between old and new. It's a bold, fresh idea within the very restricted size of arts and craft bungalow idea. Great question, Marie. I think, to kind of step back, I think Murray's question is talking about that. And I will respond first, but then I'd like to have your opinion, Jill. This neighborhood, the heritage neighborhood, is under attack, you could say, by virtue of where it's located in the city of Austin. It was designed as a suburb, but yet as the city grown, it's become part of central Austin. And now there's a lot of tension about, well, should we make it more dense whilst keeping it pedestrian friendly? Like, it's a great neighborhood because you can have access to different modes of transportation. You can walk to your local bakery. You can walk to UT. And I think right now, I think what we try to accomplish is present a way to upgrade the housing stock in those sensible areas without necessarily raising it to the ground and building something new. So it's a way to kind of merge the traditional and the contemporary. And there's different ways you can do that. You can approach it as a preservationist, where you want to recreate everything kind of the way it originally was. And that can be a great approach. It can be cost prohibitive. And it's part of a discussion we as architects, when we deal with buildings which are more than 40 years old, we always have to, talk to the city about what it is that we want to do. So it's kind of a fine rope between, wanting to respect what's already there, but at the same time, do something that is more contemporary. Jill, I don't know if you...
I don't know if I have much to add to that, but for me, I like the scale of the old buildings there, and I like the landscape, the old trees, and I feel like so much gets lost when somebody tears something down and wants to build something new, that where the goals or the vision seems to be mostly to be big and inexpensive, and to not last very long, particularly, and to not care about the trees. Anyway, I don't know if that's much of an answer, but maybe that's all I can think of to say right now.
I think what Jill is mentioning also is the importance of landscaping in this neighborhood. If you cannot control the design of all of those individual buildings, we can control, or landscape architect and architects can control kind of the buffer zone, the fact that all of those houses have a setback. Like in this instance, we decided to keep the existing house because it was so close to the street. If we wanted to build a new house, we would have to abide by, bigger setback. And we actually liked that. Jill liked the fact that the house is very close to the street. But this points to the importance of collaboration with a good landscape architect. We were fortunate to collaborate with Christy Tanike on the Court and Corton house. And here we were fortunate to collaborate with Cameron Landscape Architecture, Campbell Landscape Architecture for the Dogtrot master plan. We also, yes, Jill.
All right, it's just occurring to me that early on, we had this really big vision of, and it started with Texas French bread and their garden, and then the house next to that, which was needed to be torn down actually, which became Cortin. But we envisioned you turn onto Rio Grande from 29th going north, and that it would be almost like you were entering a garden district of Austin, so that the plantings and the trees would be lush and leafy, and you would feel like you were entering a different world. So that's not really happened particularly, but it's a little stab at it, I would say.
Yeah, by having those two houses facing each other, it kind of creates kind of a gateway into the heritage neighborhood. So again, that's very much a concern that Jill as a client had and wanted to convey through the architecture. Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm glad it worked out. Let me see. I don't think.
Charles, I might have a couple questions I wanted to follow up on,
Sure.
if you don't mind. One of them is you were talking earlier about the air conditioning system, and you mentioned how you drop the ceilings down within the individual cabins to allow for your supply air. Assuming there's only one air handler, how did you cross the trot spaces because the ceiling was up higher? Were you able to kind of sneak it in there between the roof ridge and the ceiling, or did you have to come up with some other method?
Yeah, we dropped down the ceiling about a couple of feet where you have the ceiling of the trot, and that allowed us to kind of, and position the supply. And we were interested in kind of creating a natural draft between the air that comes from the pod will kind of go through, passively cool or heat the trot area, and then return up on the wall of one of the pods.
Okay. And then the other question or follow-up I thought might be interesting is you mentioned, Jill, how this was really kind of designed to be a spec home or for someone to either move in and buy or to rent. Do you rent it now, or do you have you sold it?
I've sold it.
Okay.
Well, those three houses together were on two lots, but they were sold as a whole package. And so one of the lots had the Dogtrot house, and another house next to it. The other lot had the little bitty house, the cabanon, and a parking lot. So we would have loved, I think, to have sold them to somebody who could handle that, but we ended up turning them into condos, and we have sold all three now.
Okay. You may not be able to answer this extra follow-up then. The photos that you had in the video, Charles, were of a more Zen-like kind of Japanese style of furniture, whereas the photos that we're seeing that AIA took have a little bit more towards the American style of furniture. Did you guys have a chance to figure out, okay, were different furniture styles and layouts all still going to work, or was there just some kind of guess that eventually someone would figure out how to use it?
I would say the design was such that it would accommodate different type of interiors. I kind of like that it can be more Zen and minimalist, or it can be what you call more American. So that was kind of the point of the design, that it does allow this kind of different type of occupation. And it's such an abstract scheme that it does allow those permutation. I wanted to also, I'm seeing a couple of other questions.
Absolutely.
One from Rick Geyer. The positive impacts on this 2-3 block area are already significant, and many families and their neighbors are benefiting, truly inspiring, and will be enjoyed and studied in the future. Well, thank you,
Rick.
Thank you, Rick. I'm also seeing one from Randy Davis. Could you talk about the energy improvement that were done in the renovation? Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the biggest energy approach was to reuse as much of the housing stock as we did. Not only the foundation and the roof, but also the existing studs, the existing diagonal sheathing. This was all maintained. So it was kind of very much like a surgical operation of removing those studs that we didn't need and building on top of the existing fabric as much as we could. And I do want to do a shout out to East Side Lumber, because we were able to find a yellow pine for the exterior shiplapping, which was a D grade, and that the pattern was milled to a number 121, which is a very traditional pattern that you find in old Austin bungalows that are 100 years old. And so it was very widely used. And so they were able to recreate that kind of shiplap, V-jointed exterior shiplap. And on the interior, we used poplar, the same pattern, number 121, but a different species of wood. So it was great to, to be able to kind of source those material through East Side Lumber. Could you talk about okay, so the other approach to energy improvement was to create as much self-shaded window positioning as we could by recessing the window. We ended up changing most of the window system in the front of the house to match the existing, and we also added some insulation in between the stud, open cellulose. So it's a very well insulated house. Jill?
I just wanted to say something that's just kind of occurred to me as we've been doing this. And I think one of the aspects of the house, of the Dogtrot house that really inspires me is it seems to have a kind of integrity about it, so that nothing doesn't add to, that's not, anyway, pardon my grammar, nothing doesn't add to the whole. And because of that, I think it has a wonderful kind of inspirational or happy quality to it. I really like that. It really feels good, the way that everything works together and kind of complements everything else. And anyway, thank you, Charles.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. I'm seeing a couple more chats. Christy Seals, hearing you talk about your work takes me back to the mid-90s and our UT days. Yes, I remember those very fondly, Christy, going to design crits. Ingrid, send a shout out to you, Jill.
Thank you, Ingrid.
And Maureen Helvuson reminding me of the Menil district. Nice work. That's a very astute observation, because the color of the bungalow was borrowed from the Menil compound, this kind of gray, abstract gray.
And actually, that was an inspiration for us.
Yeah.
The Menil blocks. We couldn't do that, but that was certainly an inspiration.
We did talk about color, like you will notice the three triplets each have a different color scheme. And we looked at kind of some Morandi composition, the Italian painter. And so that's why one of the houses is gray, the other one more pinkish, and the other one kind of green. So that was, again, a desire to unify those three bungalows. They have the same typology, but the use of color kind of establishes maybe a little difference. Okay, one last question from Nicole Widerman. A great project, really nice. Gather insight, and here's a conversation. Thank you, Charles and Jill. You're very welcome, Nicole. It's been a pleasure.
Charles, you mind, before we wrap up, you mind if I just have one more follow-up? I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the juxtaposition between modern and traditional styles that you have in some areas, and how you were able to weave some more modern feeling portions of it into a traditional aspect. I'm thinking particularly of the modern white picket fence out front and how the handrails interact with the front porch. Can you just elaborate a little more on where you felt it was okay to have those more modern interventions, and where both you and Jill felt you really needed to stick towards the more traditional and historic styles for preservation reasons?
Go ahead.
The only thing I would say that I could contribute to that question probably is that I wanted the scale to stay the same. So
I think that's a primary consideration. The best historic blending that we can provide is keeping the scale of the house the way it was originally designed. And we were just very strategic about where to add the more modern touch. And the way we felt that if we kept the majority of the existing window to match the existing, like it was okay to introduce those full height doors and full height windows, as long as we kept as much of the look of the existing around the perimeter. The handrail at the entrance, I've actually agonized a lot about that, because I thought for the longest time that we could keep the existing wood balustrade, and it was a wood stair. And I think it would have been fine, to be honest. I think eventually we felt, why not, propose something more contemporary so that the entry sequence talks more about, where we are now rather than fall back to the way it was done. So I felt that the big principles were strong enough that it allowed us to take some liberty about how modern or how traditional we want it to be on the inside or on some particular aspect around the side.
I'd like to say
Go ahead.
that we had to go to the city to get permission to change the doors and windows.
That's right.
And it just luckily happened that we were able to point out to Steve Sadowski that a house across the street, our house, the Dogtrot used to be exactly a mirror image of the house across the street. And so we could show that it had been altered significantly. And that made it so that Steve Sadowski felt he could go ahead and approve the changes that we wanted to make, because we didn't need to preserve what had been changed already.
Yeah, that was part of a bigger conversation,
Yeah.
definitely. One, I'm seeing Colleen Theriot. It's such a fantastic project. Thanks to both of you honoring the integrity and scale, capitalize, of this little home. It will be a strong inspiration for all who treasure the charm and scale of our precious bungalow neighborhood. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Charles.
Oh,
well, thank you,
You're
Colleen.
welcome. Thank you.
And I think if there is no other question, I want to thank you very much for tuning in and helping support AIA Austin and our sponsors and architecture.
Thank you. It's been an honor. Thank you. I've been really happy about this.
All right.